Chapter 101, Parallel Mind. Jiang Li took out a thin stack of wood pieces from a cloth bag hanging on his belt. Each and every one of them was engraved with exquisite, complicated magical runes. Jiang Li spat out a mouthful of spiritual qi and blew it onto the stack of wooden tablets. Then, he suddenly shook his hand, and dozens of wooden tablets instantly scattered into the air. After flying to a certain height, they suddenly stopped, just like a floating staircase suspended in the air. These were rune wood pieces personally carved by Jiang Li. The runes carved on them were naturally floating. This thing could not be considered a magic artifact. Dozens of wood pieces floated in the air. Some of them even floated beside the senior brother. The senior brother of the demon vanquishing hall immediately sensed that something was amiss. As he accelerated into the sky, he waved the artifact in his hand in an attempt to shatter the wood pieces. However, it was already too late. The rock beneath his feet exploded, and Jiang Li's figure transformed into an afterimage as he soared into the sky. The thin pieces of wood shattered with each step, but the foothold that was provided in that instant was sufficient to support his high-speed flight. With just a breath, Jiang Li appeared above that senior brother. He put a hand on the other's shoulder. "Go down." In the next moment, a huge force emerged from Jiang Li's palm and pressed down on his shoulder. That senior brother's backbone suffered a heavy pressure that he should not have been able to endure at his age, and it instantly formed an exaggerated S shape before falling to the ground. With a bang, a large amount of dust was created. Jiang Li casually grabbed a piece of wood by his side and lightly placed it under his feet before slowly floating down. Junior brother Jiang Li wins. The female cultivator from the Rejuvenation Hall, who was the temporary referee, announced loudly. Jiang Li stepped forward and pulled his senior brother up. "Senior brother, I'm sorry, are you all right?" He put on a shy expression as if he was still inexperienced in the ways of the world. He did not show any arrogance because of his victory or even look down on his fellow disciples. Instead, he always acted very modestly and politely. This was also the reason why Jiang Li's reputation in the Demon Vanquishing Hall was still extremely good despite beating up quite a number of people recently. It felt pretty good to have an expert who could beat them up, call them senior brother every day. "Junior brother Jiang Li, your strength has grown tremendously." No, junior sister Qi Yu, quickly heal me." The senior brother supported his waist and stood up. It was not easy for him to straighten his spine under the effects of the healing spell. After he signaled Jiang Li with his eyes, he directly leaned towards senior sister Qi Yu's broad chest. Slam! How could senior sister Qi Yu not know this guy's character? She directly kicked his waist with practiced ease, causing the senior brother to grimace in pain and be unable to stand up for a long time. "Junior brother, don't listen to his nonsense. This guy can take a beating. You can feel free to beat him to death next time." Jiang Li smiled and hurriedly agreed. The relationship between the Demon Vanquishing Hall and the Rejuvenation Hall had been close for a long time. There were also many disciples who directly became Tao companions with each other. It was said that many senior brothers had entered the Demon Vanquishing Hall because of the medical female disciples of Rejuvenation Hall. After chatting with his senior brothers and sisters for a while, Jiang Li said that he had something to do and returned to his courtyard. The reason why Jiang Li was so anxious was not because of anything else, but because, slowly chanting the Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, level of completion 9.93000, completion rises by 0.1 every day. Duration, infinity, minus. His Bodhisattva Heart Sutra's progress had already reached 9.93000. According to his estimation, he was only a few hours away from hitting a new level. He was just one step away. Naturally, he could not wait to rush back. However, he still cautiously activated 2 layers of protective array formations. Only then did Jiang Li sit cross-legged in the cultivation chamber. Jiang Li, who had obtained a small portion of Elder Duan Shuang's inheritance, no longer cared about the expenditure of those 1 or 2 medium-grade spirit stones. Safety was the priority. Soon, with the help of the focused spirit status, the muttering in his ears became clearer. Jiang Li entered the meditation state again. Avalokitesvara, when practicing deeply in Prajna Paramita, looked down and beheld that 5 skandhas were all empty and was saved from all suffering and difficulty. Because nothing is attained, he becomes a bodhisattva. Through having relied on the Prajna Paramita, he dwells without thought impediments. Because there is no impediment, he is not afraid, and he leaves distorted dream thinking far behind, and in the end he attains nirvana, for all those who appear as him in the 3 periods of time. The number 9.9 gradually blurred, and when it was clear again, it was already 10. The first level of the spirit refinement cultivation method, Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, was finally complete. Jiang Li could not wait to start cultivating it. Because he had listened to the Heart Sutra for a long time, Jiang Li was actually quite familiar with most of the content. After reading it completely, he quickly understood many of the key points. The characteristics of Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra lay in the 2 aspects of Great Carefree and Bodhisattva. This cultivation method was not like some unreliable ancient cultivation methods. It did not need some precious materials that had long disappeared from the ancient era. This spirit refinement cultivation method was quite carefree indeed. It gives the ability to observe the sounds of all forms in the world. The main function was to develop a kind of understanding of life and the world. The deeper one's understanding was, the better the effect. There was no material need during this period. Of course, if he had the Bodhi tree and Bodhi seed to aid in his cultivation, it was not impossible for Jiang Li to sit idle for 3 years and ascend to immortality. However, Jiang Li was poor and could only cultivate pitifully. Bodhisattva referred to the cultivation goal. Great Carefree referred to the method to achieve the goal. As the saying went, a world in a single flower, a Bodhi in a single leaf. The concept of Great Carefree was to become one with everything and experience the withering of time, joy, separation, life and death. Yeah, that sounded a little cryptic. In simpler terms, it was to separate a secondary soul akin to a parallel mind from his consciousness, and throw it into the mortal world of all living things to reincarnate and comprehend the cycle of life. The target could be a piece of grass, a worm, or a person. When it died and underwent reincarnation, the cultivator would be able to obtain a transformation and thorough comprehension. It could be said to be a kind of lazy cultivation method that scattered seeds now to harvest fruits the following year. As long as the cultivator's enlightenment was sufficient, had enough fortuitous opportunities, as well as long lifespan and patience, they would be able to send out enough parallel minds to become an immortal or Buddha by doing nothing. It was indeed a great method. Jiang Li was very satisfied with this Heart Sutra. After preparing for a moment, he closed his eyes again. He planned to try circulating the Heart Sutra and create a parallel mind to see what it was like. He silently recited the Heart Sutra in his mind. Then he made an orchid flower gesture with his fingers while chanting. The 2 eyeballs under Jiang Li's eyelids moved, and his brain felt numb as if it had split into 2. In his sea of consciousness, the main consciousness that looked exactly like him flashed with golden light. Then an extremely small Jiang Li jumped out from between his eyebrows. This feeling was really strange. The 2 minds were completely connected. He knew that he was himself, but he could think of 2 different things at the same time without interfering with each other. This was not schizophrenia, nor did he develop multiple personalities. It was just the parallel mind of Jiang Li as an individual. After Jiang Li carefully sensed that feeling, he realized that his worries from before were completely unnecessary. The cloned consciousness would rebel against the main body. The sea of consciousness would become chaotic and turn him into a lunatic. Using an analogy, would a player suddenly attack their main account's character using their sub-account? Jiang Li was the only player controlling his characters, but he could now play on two accounts at once. After all, it was an ancient mighty figure's cultivation method. How could there be such a low-level problem? Chapter 102, Mayfly's Dream. Jiang Li looked at his interface again. Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra Level 1 successfully cultivated. Added status, Parallel Mind Level 1, Skill, Mayfly's Dream obtained. Parallel Mind Level 1, Second Consciousness active. Duration 24 hours minus plus. Jiang Li looked at the interface and understood in his heart. He had just tried the Heart Sutra, so how could he be like the ancient mighty figures who could split their consciousness into 3,000 incarnations? It was only because of his high compatibility with the Heart Sutra that he was able to successfully circulate it in one go. This was already extremely fortunate. However, it turned out that the parallel mind created from successfully circulating the Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra could only last for one day. Jiang Li did not directly start modifying the duration. Instead, he turned to study the new skill, Mayfly's Dream, that appeared along with parallel mind. As the saying goes, a mayfly lives and dies quickly. This skill was specially created to complement the parallel mind. After using this skill, it would turn dim on Jiang Li's interface, and it would generate a status that could only exist for 24 hours, Mayfly's Dream. Only until the next time when the parallel mind was on standby with the main body that this complementary skill would light up again. This was the method to throw the split part of Jiang Li's consciousness into other objects. Jiang Li took out the coffin in his arms and hesitated for a moment before putting it back. There was no hurry to cultivate the sword cultivator zombie puppet. Jiang Li was rather curious now. How did it feel to use the Mayfly's Dream skill normally? The sun set in the west. Jiang Li left the small courtyard and walked out of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, heading straight for the adjacent Rejuvenation Hall. Unlike the rough men of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, the female cultivators of the Rejuvenation Hall were quite relaxed when cultivating. They were good at singing and dancing. What Jiang Li wanted was the jade-green lotus pond in their territory. It was midsummer. Jiang Li walked to the side of the lotus pond. In the quiet night sky, insects sang merrily. Jiang Li stood beside the pool for a while and admired the thriving vitality of the pool for a moment. He seemed to have thought of something and turned around to leave hurriedly. However, no one knew that, in the moment that he stopped, the parallel mind had already silently fallen into the pool. At the same time, at the bottom of the pond, a strong, healthy larva, after years of growth, made all the preparations and was furiously crawling out of its hiding place. In the green pond water, a young larva twisted its body and stirred the water, slowly appearing on the surface of the water. However, not long after it crawled out of the mud, a beautiful golden-spotted spirit carp swam towards it. In this lotus pond, there was also a group of spiritual fish that were more interesting to look at than to eat. Just as the mayfly larva felt that it was unlucky and was about to die before it could succeed, the spiritual fish did not even look at it. It swayed its fat body and swam far away. It seemed that the senior sisters of the Rejuvenation Hall were overflowing with love and fed this group of spiritual fish too much fish food every day, causing them to be too full and ignore the larvae in the water. The larva's swimming ability was average. It took a lot of effort before it finally floated to the surface. However, when the feelers above its head touched the air, all its exhaustion was swept away. A strong desire drove it to get out of the water. Jiang Li originally wanted to resist that instinct and see what would happen, but he recalled the contents of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra. The key to this cultivation method was to comprehend the process, not to stir up trouble. Thus, he gave up on such meaningless thoughts and did not think in his own way. Instead, he followed his instincts. The insect waved its small feet and climbed onto the stem of a lotus flower. It moved its legs and slowly moved its body up, finally breaking through the water membrane and completely exposed itself to the air. At this moment, the sun had already completely set in the west. Only then did the fragile body of the larva not dry up from the scorching sun. A warm, moist summer breeze gently blew past. The larva felt a sense of suffocation. The air without water made it impossible for it to breathe. However, its instincts made it hold on to the stem tightly and not fall back into the water. After a wave of suffocation, Jiang Li quickly felt that the discomfort was disappearing, and what appeared instead was the stiffness of his entire body. His shell was hardening in the air, soon becoming a hard shell that completely enveloped him. Then he felt a warm itch inside the body. This feeling made him feel drowsy. Jiang Li did not resist and really fell asleep just like that. In the glory of the summer night, a mayfly was quietly transforming on the stem of a lotus flower. After an unknown period of time, Jiang Li felt a suffocating feeling that was present everywhere, and it caused him to wake up from his slumber. The shell on the outside seemed to be too small. It was the shell that pressed down on him until he could not breathe. Jiang Li wanted to escape from the restrictions, but he instinctively pushed himself forward. He wanted to bite through the membrane in front of him, but he discovered that his mouth had already disappeared. Helpless, he could only struggle with all his might. Soon, a hole appeared in the old shell above his head. Jiang Li squeezed his body out of the small hole bit by bit. He could sense that his strength far surpassed that of his young self. His body and older parts separated from him bit by bit. Jiang Li took the opportunity to exert force, and his entire body escaped from the old shell. A pair of beautiful insect wings unfolded, and a pair of long tails swayed with the wind, looking like an elf spirit in his dreams. This was an insignificant insect, an ancient winged mayfly. Under the summer wind, his insect wings kept spreading out and becoming stronger. When the first rays of sunlight shone, he was about to spread his wings and fly. The current Jiang Li had no mouth. He could not eat, but his thin body seemed to be bursting with infinite vitality in the wind. Finally, the morning light tore through the sky, and a gentle and warm glow scattered towards the pond. Jiang Li discovered that the lotus leaves on the rocks around him had already been filled with mayflies like himself. At this moment, the morning light was like a signal. The mayflies in the sky danced in groups and shone brilliantly under the sunlight. Seeing the swarm of female mayflies, Jiang Li knew the mayfly could not hold it in any longer. It flapped its wings and rose into the air. However, for the ancient winged mayflies, there were far more females than males. As soon as this mayfly flew up, it was pursued by hundreds of female mayflies who danced around it. One female after another came up to rub their heads against it. The mayfly followed its instincts and released everything that it had accumulated over the past 6 years. Just like that, it had the greatest day of its life. It was as if the ancient winged mayfly had spent its entire life preparing for this one day. The mayfly's wild dance continued under the sun for an entire day. No one knew how their tiny bodies contained so much energy. It was not until dusk that the mayfly finally stopped its wild dance and landed on a lotus leaf in exhaustion. The interior of his carapace was already empty. It had used up everything on this day. Having completed the mission of reproduction, the meaning of its entire life was fulfilled. The mayfly quietly lay on the lotus leaf, and the glow on the insect gradually disappeared. In the last light of its beady eyes, it saw yet another, vigorous larva emerging from the water. Chapter 103, Liquor Fire Sword Song. In a quiet room in a small courtyard in the demon-vanquishing hall, Jiang Li, who was meditating cross-legged, suddenly stopped cultivating. After the temporary group dance of the mayfly ended, the parallel mind brought his experiences back to Jiang Li's mind. From the moment it broke free from the safe and comfortable soil, to emerging from the water surface, to the transformation from a pupa, to the happiest day of its life, and finally when it died peacefully. The day of the mayfly's life was also a lifetime. From its point of view, although it was not exciting, it was definitely fulfilling. It was different from the research records of humans. From the perspective of the mayfly, it did not actually have any thoughts. It only knew from instinct that it wanted to do this, that it should do this, and then it would do everything it could. Growth, metamorphosis, emergence, reproduction, death, and reincarnation. These were all the processes of the tiny mayfly's cycle of life. After experiencing this once more in his mind, Jiang Li sighed while his mood was inexplicably slightly depressed. He did not know if he had comprehended anything. However, when he opened his eyes again, everything became exceptionally clear. It was not that his vision had improved, but that he felt as if the world had lifted a veil over him, revealing more of its beauty and secrets. He opened the status bar and saw that his mind and enlightenment attributes had actually increased by a whole point each. How exaggerated! After all, Jiang Li had been cultivating qi refinement for so long, and his other attributes had been growing all the way. However, in terms of mind and enlightenment, he had always been progressing slowly. This was especially true for his enlightenment attribute. Apart from the 2 points provided by the focused spirit status, the number had not changed at all. However, it had only been a day since he had started cultivating the Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, yet he had already achieved such a tremendous improvement. In theory, not to mention a mere mayfly, even if he were to absorb the mind attribute of 100 or 1,000 mayflies collectively, he would not be able to obtain such growth. However, just as he had said before, this cultivation method emphasized on one word, comprehension. Even though this was the first time Jiang Li had observed the ways of the world, so it was natural that he comprehend a lot. It was sufficient to prove how powerful this Heart Sutra was. Jiang Li took a deep breath and released himself from the emotions of dying once. Only then did he circulate the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra and form a new parallel mind. With his first experience, Jiang Li did not make any mistakes this time, especially after his mind and enlightenment had been improved. His circulation of the cultivation method became even more smooth and natural. Parallel Mind Level 1, Second Consciousness Active, Duration 26 hours minus plus. The duration of the parallel mind had also increased. Of course, this was actually not very useful. Jiang Li pressed the plus button for 5 seconds, causing the duration of the parallel mind to become infinite. He opened the coffin and controlled the sword cultivator zombie to crawl out. Only then did Jiang Li activate the skill, Mayfly's Dream, again, and send his parallel mind into the zombie's body. 5 senses technique, there was no need for it. Zombie puppet technique, it was irrelevant now. When his parallel mind entered the body, it practically had an effect that was even more exaggerated than reincarnation. The eyes of the sword cultivator slowly showed the spirituality that only living people had. Thump, thump, thump. The sword cultivator and Jiang Li revealed identical expressions of pleasant surprise at the same time. Their palms touched their chests, and the heart within actually started to beat energetically again. The cold body gradually recovered its temperature, and his pale skin quickly regained its color. Jiang Li went up and touched it. Unlike the stiffness before, the body of the sword cultivator now had vitality and flexibility. After retracting the parallel mind, this temporary resurrection would disappear. However, at the very least through his parallel mind, Jiang Li could clearly sense that he was alive. Unexpectedly, the Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra had such an effect. No, it should be said that such an effect was normal. For example, among the legendary deities and Buddhas that he knew in his previous life, most of their essence souls would use corpses to resurrect. There were very few cases of them forcefully taking over a living person's body. Those who did that were basically all evil beings. Jiang Li guessed that the goddess of mercy was a Buddhist eminence to begin with. At the very least, in public opinion, these beings were particular about cutting off their flesh to feed the eagle and the tiger. They were also known as benevolent. If their major cultivation method could only seize the lives of others, then it would be too demonic. So they often used the dead to continue their lives. Even if they were reincarnated, they would basically be reincarnated into the bodies of dead fetuses. In that case, Letting the sword cultivator's corpse revive temporarily was the basic operation. As the body temperature rose, some of the remaining memories in the sword cultivator's brain surfaced bit by bit. There were some voices, some images, and some words. They were chaotic and incomplete. Tang Yan. The parallel mind uttered these two words. So this person was originally called Tang Yan. Jiang Li nodded secretly. Perhaps he could investigate the life of this sword cultivator, Tang Yan, through the outside world. He continued to sort out more things, but after all, it was a brain that had been dead for months. There were very few things left. Apart from a large number of fragmented memories that could not be pieced together, in this brain, there were only two things that left the deepest impression that were still intact. First, it was the name Tang Yan. Second, it was a fire element sword cultivation method called Liquor Fire Sword Song. The parallel mind sat down cross-legged and tried to cultivate according to the cultivation method in his memory to familiarize himself with the Tao foundation that had been preserved in this body. Under the continuous infusion of Jiang Li's spiritual qi, it was equivalent to his clone holding a high-grade spirit stone and absorbing it constantly to aid in his cultivation. This sort of treatment, even if he was a Shu Mountain disciple, could not be enjoyed by just anyone. Swoosh! Soon, the Fire Tao Foundation was activated again. A scorching aura spread out from Tang Yan's body, causing the temperature in the sealed room to rise rapidly. Liquor! Jiang Li sensed the request of his clone, and it just happened that there were a few bottles of good wine in the coffin sent by the outer sect disciples. He took one out of the coffin and threw it over. The clone Tang Yan did not even open his eyes as he directly stretched out his hand to grab the wine jar. The clone and his main body's consciousness were completely connected. If Jiang Li saw it, it was equivalent to him seeing it. Slamming the seal, the clone grabbed the mouth of the jar and drank it. The strong smell of alcohol filled the air. Soon, the skin of Tang Yan turned red and hot, and an even hotter aura spread out. Jiang Li, who stood before his clone, could not help but take 2 steps back. If he got too close, then perhaps he would be fine, but his clothes would burn. With his combat style as a body cultivator who loved to tear his clothes, the expenditure of his disciple uniform was very rapid. He had to be a little careful. However, to be able to reveal such an aura while cultivating, the power of foundation establishment cultivators was undoubtedly amazing. Jiang Li, on the other hand, marveled at the strong smell of alcohol. The legacy of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was interesting. The sword cultivators of Tang Yan's faction all drank heavily. They cultivated qi and alcohol together. When the liquor fire sword technique was used, the power was abnormally shocking. Even among the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, this was quite famous. Chapter 104, 3 Punches. A while later, after drinking several bottles of strong wine, the alcohol smell in the quiet room slowly faded away and was absorbed back into the body of Tang Yan. After several qi circulations, the liquor fire sword song finally revitalized his exhausted Tao foundation. Under the continuous nourishment of endless spiritual qi, it would probably not be long before he could completely recover or even advance a step further. But before that, Jiang Li had to do something. Burning rainbow, come. The flying sword that was placed at the side flew over and landed in Tang Yan's hand. Without hesitation, Tang Yan opened his palm, and a ball of spirit fire that carried a strong fragrance of wine appeared. It completely enveloped the flying sword and burned fiercely. Not only was the crimson sword not damaged because of this, but it also began to tremble excitedly. How could a fire attribute flying sword be afraid of fire? Under the burning of the liquor spirit fire, the curved sword body was currently recovering bit by bit. The chip that was created by the zombie core and golden core of the zombie demon was also slowly recovering to a flat state under the infusion of a large amount of spiritual qi. Jiang Li stood at the side while holding the spirit rune carving knife. From time to time, he would reach his hand into the spirit fire and draw a mark on the sword. The spirit runes engraved on the flying sword were abnormally complicated, as if it was a high-grade technique to draw out the cloud runes on the refinement material itself. With Jiang Li's current level, he still could not understand it. However, his talent in spirit rune carving was indeed not bad. He could still reconnect a few broken marks according to the original lines. After roughly 4 hours, after Jiang Li sacrificed the sleeve of his right hand, the broken spirit runes were finally repaired. The spirit runes on the flying sword also began to glow with a faint red light. However, the chip in the sword did not recover so quickly. After all, it was created by the zombie core of a golden core zombie demon. It was fortunate that it did not break into 2 pieces. Jiang Li roughly calculated in his heart. According to this speed, it would at least be around 7 days before the sword would recover to its original state. However, the cost of sustaining this spirit fire for 7 days was definitely not something that an ordinary foundation establishment cultivator could withstand. They would definitely need to use spirit stones. Just repairing this flying sword required so many spirit stones that an ordinary foundation establishment cultivator would probably go bankrupt several times. However, for Jiang Li, it was fine if it took a longer time. He did not lack spiritual qi. He temporarily stopped a portion of the spiritual qi that flowed towards the yin burial coffin and dragon imprisoning lock, and instead transferred it to the body of the sword cultivator, Tang Yan. Double the spiritual qi and double the spirit fire naturally meant double the effect. In this way, it would only take more than 3 days to completely repair this sword. He could still afford to wait 3 days. The only problem now was that this room was getting hotter and hotter. He could not stay here any longer. He had to find another place to cultivate. A few days later, Jiang Li arrived at the hall of the Demon Vanquishing Hall early in the morning. However, it was not that unlucky Qi Refinement Realm's senior brother who was waiting for him today. It was a tall, dark-skinned senior sister. Jiang Li hesitated for a moment before jumping onto the arena. "Senior sister, you are." Jiang Li had never seen this senior sister in the sect. However, the bright red tattoo on her neck made Jiang Li have some guesses about her identity. However, the other party did not answer Jiang Li's question, and she just sized Jiang Li up. "You're Jiang Li," the female cultivator asked in a somewhat rude tone. Jiang Li nodded in agreement, but he did not say anything else. He just stood there without moving or saying anything. This senior sister in front of him had such an expression as soon as she met him. It was not pleasant, and this was also not the way Jiang Li liked to interact with people. Most of the time, the way people interacted with each other was set by the moment they met for the first time. So, in order to not suffer such cold treatment in the future, Jiang Li decided that he could not let the other party put on airs. He was not interested in sucking up to others. The other party seemed to be used to the praises of others anyway. It was as if she would not respond unless someone started fawning over her. Therefore, the atmosphere turned cold. The two of them stood there and stared at each other for a long time. Jiang Li was expressionless, but in his heart, he sized up the female cultivator's appearance with interest. Although she was tall, her defined and explosive muscles were still vaguely visible under her clothes. This might be a body cultivator who was more specialized in agility. Cultivation and movement techniques had always been Jiang Li's sore point. Clearly, all the other cultivation aspects were going smoothly, but only this aspect of movement technique caused Jiang Li to go mad. All right, his other cultivation went smoothly because of the statuses. However, physical technique was most important in training movement techniques, so it did not benefit much from the statuses. Instead, his overly fast speed made him easily flustered and was an obstruction instead. Judging from her aura, her cultivation level was not only at the Qi refinement realm. If the opponent's speed was not inferior to his, he would be at a loss against such an agile opponent. The awkward stalemate continued for a few minutes. Jiang Li was calm, but the other party was clearly not a social person. Under her dark skin, A flush of blood was quickly rising. Clearly, there was still some social anxiety in her. Jiang Li nodded to himself and ended the awkward confrontation. "Senior sister, you must be Master's disciple, right? I've been under Master's tutelage for a long time and haven't gone to greet you. I'm really sorry about that." When interacting with this kind of arrogant, pampered, and slightly socially awkward senior sister, one had to first start an awkward conversation and remove some of her overbearing aura. He could not give in to the other party's rhythm. Otherwise, it would be too late to turn the tables in the future. Jiang Li's words were polite and powerful, and he took some initiative and position in their conversation. The senior sister opposite him seemed to heave a sigh of relief. Jiang Li was her junior brother in the end. It was impossible for her to start a conflict without distinguishing right from wrong, and she was afraid of falling into that sort of awkward conversation again, so she could only temporarily put aside her thoughts of establishing her senior sister's dignity. When she opened her mouth again, her tone could not help but ease up. "Yes, I'm Liu Mulan. You can call me Senior Sister Liu in the future." The other party introduced herself simply. Her name sounded manly. "All right, Senior Sister Mulan," Jiang Li politely called out, causing Senior Sister Mulan to choke. She wanted to refute him that she was Senior Sister Liu, but it seemed that she could not find any fault with Jiang Li's way of calling her. If she deliberately emphasized it, it would be as if she was looking for trouble. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Senior Sister Mulan still acquiesced to this title. As for Jiang Li, he had unknowingly made the other party give in slightly. It was a trick to create a friendly, social scene in the future. "I heard Master recently took in a new disciple. It seems your talent in body cultivation is not bad. What's your current cultivation level?" Senior Sister Mulan took a few steps forward. The wind beneath her feet blew, and in a few flashes she arrived in front of Jiang Li. All right, it was exactly the same as Elder He's actions back then. Both of them stretched out their hands to pinch him. Could this be the special greeting method used by body cultivators? Junior brother's talent is mediocre. Currently, for both chi refinement and body refinement, I am only at the mid-stage. Jiang Li moved his feet and evaded the other party's palm before continuing to ask. "Senior Sister Mulan, where has Master been recently? I haven't seen Master for more than a month now. I miss him so much." When he said this, Jiang Li felt extremely disgusted by himself. However, the true reason was that the lunar bear tattoo on Jiang Li's back was about to vanish. Jiang Li was still hoping that Elder He would return and get him a third tattoo. That jar of medicinal soup was too expensive, and Jiang Li did not know how to mix it himself. "Master has an important matter to deal with and can't return to the valley for the time being. He asked me to come back this time to teach you on his behalf and guide your next step in cultivation." Since the head elder of the demon vanquishing hall had to go out for so long, things must be serious. Could it be that another demon had appeared outside? Forget it. He was only in the chi refinement realm and could not care about this. His current goal was to improve his strength as soon as possible. Since this senior sister had specially returned, she should also know how to make the medicinal soup. He should be able to obtain his next blood tattoo soon. However, in the next moment, a small fist carried a vicious wind as it struck directly at Jiang Li's head. Bang! Jiang Li raised his hand and blocked the fist. It felt stiff to the touch, but the force that came from it was not great. It should be that the other party had underestimated Jiang Li's strength and had deliberately reduced her strength. "Senior sister, what are you doing?" Jiang Li asked in surprise. "Since we are disciples of the demon vanquishing hall, exterminating demons is naturally the best cultivation style. However, your cultivation is still shallow and your strength is too weak. I'm not sure if you will be safe when following me around. If you can take 3 of my punches without falling off the arena, I'll bring you out of the valley." This is the first punch. Like teacher, like disciple. Could it be that his other senior brothers and sisters were also so violent? The fist that was blocked by Jiang Li suddenly exerted strength again. From the small fist, a tsunami-like force surged over. Jiang Li was caught off guard and was pushed back. Second punch. Jiang Li finally managed to adjust his center of gravity and barely stopped at the edge of the arena. However, before he could do anything, senior sister Mulan had already arrived before him like a shadow. If he was struck by this punch, he would definitely be sent flying. However, it was already too late to dodge. Pew! Jiang Li was quick-witted and spat out a mouthful of spiritual qi. The yin attribute spiritual qi sprayed onto the other party's face. Senior sister Mulan's vision was obstructed, and she instinctively closed her eyes. Jiang Li seized the opportunity to lower his body and dodge the fist, and then he used the momentum to use his mountain-crushing demon ape. He used his tempered shoulders to fiercely smash into the other party's chest and abdomen. Bang! Amidst the muffled sound of collision, Jiang Li pushed his opponent back, creating two deep ravines on the rocky ground. However, it did not send her flying. Jiang Li cursed in his heart. This senior sister was definitely a body cultivator at the Foundation establishment realm. Her strength was not inferior to his and was even stronger than him. Without accelerating to accumulate force, the power of the mountain-crushing scripture was not enough to form an advantage. Junior brother, your strength is quite impressive. Senior sister Mulan held Jiang Li's shoulder with one hand, preventing him from escaping. After rubbing her chest with the other hand, she clenched her fist and raised it high. Boom! Rocks shattered and dust surged. In a depression in the ground, Jiang Li held his head and grimaced in pain. Chapter 105. The Sign of a Kingdom's Demise. After a good few seconds, Jiang Li stood up from the pile of rubble. As expected, his disciple uniform had become tattered again. Are you really only in the mid-stage body refinement realm? The senior sister looked at Jiang Li, who stood up, and then looked at her fist with an expression of disbelief. After taking a solid punch from her, this guy was actually fine. There was also a force that made her chest feel a little stuffy. How was this guy still at the body refinement realm? Although it was still inferior to her, it was already extremely exaggerated. This kind of strength could probably already fight against weaker Foundation establishment cultivators. It seemed that their master was not lying when he praised Jiang Li. This junior brother's talent in body cultivation was really exaggerated. You've passed the test. Go back and pack your things. I'll bring you out of the valley tomorrow. Senior sister Mulan was an impatient person. After she finished making the arrangements, she planned to leave. This time, she had not returned purely to fetch Jiang Li. She also needed to bring other late-stage Qi refinement realm disciples to participate in a long-term mission to eliminate demons in another sect. All right, senior sister. However, I still have one thing that I need your help with. Seeing that the other party was about to leave, Jiang Li stopped her. His tattoo needed to be replaced as soon as possible. As he spoke, Jiang Li revealed the extremely dim blood-colored tattoo on his back. Senior sister Liu Mulan immediately understood. She first brought Jiang Li to the Demon Vanquishing Hall's storehouse. In the Demon Vanquishing Hall, there were still a few disciples who cultivated the beast blood diagram. The medicinal soup that was used to supplement the blood of beasts naturally could not be blended every time. The spiritual medicines had long been rationed and stored in the storehouse. However, the cultivation of drawing the beast blood into his body was quite risky, especially for a newbie like Jiang Li. He needed someone to watch over him. Otherwise, it was very easy for accidents to happen. Elder He was worried that Jiang Li would mess around and kill himself, so he did not give him the authority. Although Jiang Li had already raised his mind attribute once, so it should be easier to deal with it now. After all, it was rare to face a ghost during the process. It was probably the karma of his predecessor, who had done too many bad things that Jiang Li had such bad luck. However, Elder He did not know where Jiang Li's confidence lay. Coupled with the few disciples who had died because of this, he naturally would not let Jiang Li take the risk. After taking the spiritual medicine, senior sister Mulan asked Jiang Li to light the fire and boil it himself. She took Elder He's identity token and went to mobilize some people. Jiang Li was horrible when it came to refining pills. Originally, he was afraid that he would make a mistake, but later on, he discovered that the refinement of this spiritual medicine was extremely simple. He just had to control the size of the flame and time the steps properly to throw the spiritual materials in. Everything would be fine so long as he followed the procedures. That night, after the spiritual medicine was successfully boiled, Jiang Li carried out the third beast blood infusion under senior sister Mulan's care. As for beast blood materials, he was not lacking either. Some time ago, Elder He had caught 10 demon beasts that had almost reached the limit of the Foundation establishment realm for him. After he killed them, the heart and blood essence were stored in an ice box. Thus he had many choices. Different demon beasts had different characteristics and specialties, and they could also help Jiang Li in different aspects. Jiang Li was good in strength, physique, and speed. It seemed that every aspect was not an issue. The only weakness he had as a body cultivator was the inability to move rapidly around a small area. In the end, between the two choices of increasing his strength or covering weaknesses, Jiang Li chose the latter. This time, nothing unexpected happened. The lunar bear blood tattoo completely disappeared, and a brand new tattoo appeared. What appeared on Jiang Li's back was a slender and robust vine-tailed leopard. The nimbleness and reaction speed of this feline demon beast was extremely exaggerated. At that time, it caused Jiang Li quite a bit of trouble, and he hoped that after he obtained its strength, it would be able to assist his movement speed. The next morning, Jiang Li boarded the Demon Vanquishing Hall's warship. He only carried a small bag to hide the truth from others. All of the other useful things were stored in the spacious coffin. With spatial equipment, traveling away from home was convenient and fast. This time, there were more than 30 late-stage Qi refinement realm disciples with them, and he had fought most of them before. However, they did not feel awkward when they met. Instead, they greeted each other with familiarity. The flying ship rose into the air, accelerating in a certain direction. According to senior sister Liu Mulan, for some reason, there were frequent demon attacks in the countries in the north of the Great Mountain region. The commoners suffered heavy casualties, and it was at the stage where one zombie would emerge from every 10 corpses buried. In a few regions, the demons had gathered in large numbers, forming a substantial force. The sect was worried that if they left it alone, there would be great dangers like zombie kings and demon kings appearing. Thus, they were going to eliminate these hidden dangers and eliminate demons. This region was very far from the sect. It was just that the 4 major sects of the Great Mountain region were in charge of the 4 directions respectively. If anything happened, they could order the nearby small sects to be summoned, but they had to express their stance. Jiang Li stayed on the flying ship for about 5 days before he finally felt the speed decrease. The flying ship slowly landed on a mountaintop. There was a brand new house there. It should be the temporary residence of the sect. However, when Jiang Li stood by the window and looked down, he saw a patch of lingering yin qi enveloping a rather vast area nearby. Is this the sign of a kingdom's demise? Jiang Li was a little uncertain. According to the ancient books of Feng Shui, this dense yin qi could only be seen when a country was on the verge of destruction, or even after a country was destroyed. In that case, his first demon suppression mission might last for a long time. Don't wander around at night. 3 Qi refinement realm disciples will act together. Jiang Li, follow me tomorrow. After splitting up, the disciples each found a room to rest. Senior sister Liu Mulan originally wanted to take care of this junior brother of hers, Jiang Li, and let him stay next door. However, Jiang Li tactfully rejected. He found a room at the edge of the temporary base and stayed there. He had to do many things in secret every day, but he did not really want a senior sister in the Foundation establishment realm to care about his life every day. It would be terrible if something happened at night. After all, the other party was his senior sister. It was impolite to resist, but if he did not resist, it would appear that he was not reserved enough. Therefore, it was safer to maintain a distance. At night, Jiang Li secretly left his room. After avoiding the cultivator on duty, he agilely entered the forest in the mountain. After running far away and confirming that there was no one around, Jiang Li took out the yin burial coffin and threw it on the ground. Chapter 106, Bodhisattva Heart Sutra equals demonic technique. The coffin landed on the ground upright. After enlarging to a normal size, it was like a door frame. The coffin lid opened automatically. A moment later, a graceful white-robed sword cultivator walked out. It had to be said that the quality of the disciple uniform of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was really good. The materials used were high-end and soft to the touch. Even if there was no wind, they would sway on their own. He was even soaked in the thick black yin corpse blood for so long, but the color changed back to the original state after a simple wash. This was probably what the elites of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak saw. Their equipment was always much better than others. Jiang Li did not communicate with the sword cultivator clone verbally. It was as if they were unable to see each other. Jiang Li put away the coffin and turned around to return to the peak of the mountain, whereas his clone lightly stepped on the ground and transformed into a white shadow that flashed down the mountain. The two of them parted ways. After all, they were both the same person essentially. There was really no meaning in talking to himself. Because they were too close to the temporary camp of the Scripture Storage Valley, if they were discovered, it was very easy to have a misunderstanding and accident. The sword cultivator clone did not rashly mount his sword and merely relied on the martial arts beneath his feet to fly through the cover of the forest. His actions were exactly the same as when Jiang Li was cultivating in the sect earlier. In any case, he was still at the Foundation establishment realm. The speed of sword cultivators was actually not slow. However, due to the severe loss of memories, other than the liquor fire sword song, his clone was basically an empty piece of white paper. He had also forgotten all kinds of movement techniques, so he could only use the shallow movement technique that Jiang Li's main body knew to travel. After descending all the way to the foot of the mountain, Jiang Li still did not let his clone rise into the air. Instead, he moved his legs and ran into the distance like a phantom. The reason why he did not ride a sword was firstly because riding a flying sword with the fire attribute was basically as conspicuous as shooting lightning at night. He would be easily discovered by others. Due to certain considerations, he did not want to expose the connection between his clone and his main body. After all, the effect of the Heart Sutra was too powerful, and it was very easy to be feared by others. Think about it, the enemy could kill your family, friends, parents, and loved ones before taking over their lives. Even if the killer was right beside you, you would still spend time with him intimately. How terrifying was that? If this sort of cultivation method were to fall into the hands of someone with ulterior motives, it would simply be an unparalleled demonic technique, the most vicious among vicious techniques. In his shoes, if such a person existed, Jiang Li would also eliminate him quickly. The second reason was that Jiang Li discovered that his clone's cultivation level was higher than him. Moreover, he still had the foundation of his original Shu Mountain movement technique. When he used the main body's movement technique, he could improve at lightning speed. This kind of understanding and experience could be reflected to his main body in real time. It was very helpful to his movement technique cultivation. Thus, in order to use the clone to cultivate the movement technique, the parallel mind had to work extra hard. However, compared to spiritual qi, the stamina of the clone was limited. After running for an entire night, the clone's stamina was almost exhausted. Only then did he step on his flying sword to rise into the sky and fly towards a certain direction. While flying high in the sky, Jiang Li's clone was abnormally excited. Relying on the endless spiritual qi flowing out of his body, he continuously urged his spiritual qi to speed up, constantly making various difficult movements in the sky. The low-grade yin refinement art, was obviously unable to allow the clone to receive his spiritual chi transfer from a distance. Jiang Li searched in the scripture storage pavilion for a long time before finally finding a suitable spell technique. Through the connection between their consciousnesses, he was barely able to do this. In the air, there were no speed limitations or obstructions, allowing him to fly freely in an open space. That kind of refreshing feeling of rushing into a violent wind was really satisfying. Jiang Li screamed in his heart. This was truly cultivation. Honestly speaking, this was the first time Jiang Li had flown alone. In the past, in the sect, if one did not ride a flying ship, one would have to walk on two legs. Disciples were not allowed to fly on their magic artifacts in public areas. Therefore, after Jiang Li obtained the dragon imprisoning lock and the sword cultivator clone, he had only tried to float at a low altitude in his room. This was the first time he had flown so happily like today. His clone flew towards his destination at extreme speed, and the main vision returned to Jiang Li. At this moment, Jiang Li had already entered a forest formed from 7 tall mountains not far away under the lead of senior sister Liu Mulan. More than 10 kilometers away from the forest, there was a rather prosperous human city. The area it covered was probably larger than the combined size of Cloud Stream City and the Southern Seal Kingdom. Is this one of the gathering places of the demons? After all, the demon gathering place sounded like a tiger's den. It seemed very dangerous for 2 cultivators to enter. I guess so, you'll know when you get in. When Liu Mulan said this, she even looked at the city in the distance. Her eyes were surging with inexplicable emotions. This mountain forest looked withered and yellow from afar. Jiang Li did not suspect her, and only thought that it was the demons that destroyed the environment. When he truly stepped foot into it, dense shock arose in Jiang Li's heart. The bark is all gone. Yes, this forest was very different from other places. The trees in this forest were almost without bark. At first, Jiang Li thought that it was only a special type of tree that had no bark, but when he approached one, he saw that there were still a large number of tooth marks on the tree trunk. These were all chewed through. Jiang Li took a step forward, wanting to take a closer look at the remaining tooth marks on the tree trunk. However, there was a crack. His foot stepped into something. It felt a little strange. Jiang Li lowered his head and saw that the ground was covered by thick leaves. The leaves were blown away with a breath, and what he stepped on was a dried-up skeleton. When Jiang Li had just entered the sect, he had done the deed of excavating graves, digging graves, and stealing corpses. He was not afraid of corpses. Instead, he watched the skull carefully. The sparse teeth were almost identical to the tooth marks on the tree trunk. Jiang Li blew out another long breath, blowing away a large number of fallen leaves. The forest was completely dead. Under the dead trees, there were corpses everywhere. Jiang Li had an idea of what happened, but he could not help but ask, "Senior Sister Mulan, what were they doing?" The people in that city, and those who fled farther away, starved to death. So it was a famine. No wonder this was the result. There was a famine even farther away. They fled here and ate all the food in the city. As a result, everyone became refugees. Without food, they went up the mountain to dig grass roots and eat tree barks. In the end, the grass was dug out and the tree barks were eaten. The tree trunk could not be bitten, so they starved to death under the tree. It was not a good feeling to be hungry. Fortunately, he had the status of satiety and anedia. He probably would not feel hungry in this lifetime. "Senior Sister, are they the ones we need to deal with?" Jiang Li asked. "Yes, it's them." Senior Sister Liu Mulan squatted down, took out a talisman and pressed it on a corpse. Sizzle! The talisman immediately emitted white smoke. The yin qi on the body completely dissipated, and the corpse completely collapsed. They died of hunger. Hatred and pain bound their souls, turning them into hungry ghouls that ate away at everything. It's daytime now, and the yang qi is suppressing them so that they can't move. At night, they will get up and eat everything they can see. So we have to send them to rest in peace. You have a yin attribute spiritual root. This should not be difficult for you. That talisman paper was only to show Jiang Li. In fact, for body cultivators, crushing their skulls was more convenient. However, all of them. Jiang Li glanced at the corpses that covered the entire mountain and felt helpless in his heart. Moreover, if so many corpses rose at night, he would probably be drowned by the tide. Jiang Li walked to the next corpse and reached out to grab it. Sizzle, sizzle. However, as soon as he grabbed it, the sound of burning iron could be heard between Jiang Li's palm and the skull. A moment later, the entire skeleton collapsed. This was the effect of anti-demon golden skin. This was the first time Jiang Li had experienced the anti-demon effect. It seemed quite effective. In this period of time, Yan Hong later helped Jiang Li buy 2 more portions of golden powder. However, due to his interface settings, 2 similar statuses could not be stacked and could only be overwritten. Therefore, if Jiang Li wanted to have the anti-demon golden skin on his entire body, he had to apply it all at once, not part by part. Therefore, he still had not used the 2 sets of golden powder directly. It seemed that this Buddhist product was indeed quite effective on ghosts and evil beings. However, with such an exaggerated quantity, it did not seem like there was much use even if he could restrain them. Jiang Li rolled up his sleeves. Therefore, all he could do was to work overtime. Chapter 107, Caught. Jiang Li's nearly endless stamina displayed an obvious advantage here. To him, constantly brandishing his fists all day and night was as easy as breathing. There was no actual loss. In terms of stamina, even senior sister Liu Mulan, who was a level higher than him, was inferior to him. When the sun went down at night, the yang qi weakened and the yin qi flourished. Without the yang qi suppression, the countless ghouls lying on the ground started to get up. The nose that had almost completely rotted sniffed, and all the evil beings looked at the living beings on the mountain. How could a tree trunk that could not be chewed be as delicious as fresh human meat? Under the urging of their hunger, they attacked like a tide. Some of the other disciples of the demon vanquishing hall rode their artifacts and left. To them, who were only at the late-stage qi refinement realm, such a number of evil beings could easily crush them. However, Jiang Li and Liu Mulan did not leave. According to senior sister Mulan, slaying demons and devils was a cultivation method in itself. This was what she had been waiting for. The reason why she brought Jiang Li out of the valley was to teach him how to cultivate. It was not to smash corpses like in the day. It was precisely this kind of overwhelming corpse tide every night that was the cultivation opportunity they were waiting for. The danger of these hungry ghouls was not high. Even if they stood still, it was hard to break through their defense. Therefore, although there were many of them, they did not need to stand back to defend. The 2 of them separated, brandishing their fists like bulldozers as they began to push through the corpses. At first, senior sister Liu Mulan was rather worried about Jiang Li. However, after observing for a long time from the side and noticing that Jiang Li could really take care of himself, she slowly relaxed. Facing these sandbags that delivered themselves to their doorsteps, the feeling of training was indeed different. As long as one relaxed a little, there would be ghouls pouncing on them. One such ghoul would slow a person down, impede their movements, and then more would stack. A few, dozens, or hundreds of them would not give you any chance to catch your breath. If that happened, even Jiang Li would find it troublesome. Therefore, he could not afford to make any mistakes when faced with the tide of corpses. He could only wave his fists and accelerate his body cultivation under the pressure. Furthermore, the feeling of hitting a rock was different from hitting a person. There were countless moving sandbags for him to practice with. Jiang Li also discovered many small flaws in his original actions. From the looks of it, these small flaws did not seem to matter much. But when it came to a life-and-death battle, perhaps a hair's breadth difference could decide victory or defeat. Under senior sister Mulan's guidance, these flaws were quickly found and corrected. As for the cultivation of the ghost wood art, Jiang Li did not let it go. After all, in this world, qi refinement was the main path. He could not fall behind in this aspect. However, he was different from others. For the sake of the pressure training of the corpse tied at night, he could only arrange the time to cultivate his qi and continue listening to the sutra during the day. With this cycle, time passed little by little. 10 days later, the sword cultivator clone flew high in the sky like a shooting star and gradually slowed down. The flames on the flying sword's body extinguished as it slowly descended. In the end, he could not stand his exhaustion and chose a valley that did not seem dangerous to land in. The parallel mind clone could not benefit from the status buffs together with the main body. Although Tang Yan was at the Foundation establishment realm, he was still a human. After 10 days of continuous flight, he could replenish his spiritual qi from time to time, so there was not much problem. However, his physical and mental exhaustion were already quite severe. If he did not rest, his condition would worsen. If he met an enemy, he would fall into a very dangerous situation. After landing in the valley, he casually waved burning rainbow and fiery sword qi flew out, splitting the grass and trees in the valley into pieces, almost causing a forest fire. Nothing jumped out here, it's safe. Looking around, he saw a huge hollow tree lying on the ground. It was the kind of withered tree that could allow a person to crawl whenever the protagonist in a movie was chased by a behemoth. This place is just right. The clone did not bring the yin burial coffin with him. It was not bad to have such a natural shelter while sleeping in the wilderness. After entering the hole in the withered tree, the sword cultivator clone carefully released the fire attribute spiritual qi and quickly roasted the moist tree whole. After burning all the insects and parasites in the tree whole, he stuffed the empty tree trunk with junk. After disguising himself, he fell asleep. He slept for a long time. The sword cultivator clone woke up after a bump. A bump. After being stunned for a moment, Jiang Li started to feel that something was amiss. The whistling wind outside and the slight rise and fall of weight indicated that the tree trunk he was on had been grabbed by something. What kind of demon was so bored that it would pick up a tree trunk for no reason? As he cursed, he also thought, has the other party discovered me? After thinking for a moment, Jiang Li did not act rashly. Instead, he drew his flying sword, burning rainbow, and dug a small hole in the tree hole. The cold air in the sky instantly poured in. Looking down through the small hole, he was at least 3,000 meters above the ground. Gasp, it was so high, what had pulled him up? He dug another small hole in the trunk. What entered his sight were a few huge feathers the size of a basin, reflecting a metallic luster. A bird. Jiang Li was surprised in his heart. Creatures in the cultivation world had always been rich in nutrition. In terms of size, each was more exaggerated than the previous. They simply grew without any fear. Although he could not see the full appearance of the ferocious bird outside, he still had the experience of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra. With the sound of wings flapping in the air, Jiang Li constructed a model using his hearing. He could basically tell that this huge bird had a wingspan of at least 20 meters. With this size, none of the demon beasts he had dealt with before could compare to it. However, it did not crush the tree trunk with its claws. Why did it need to bring the entire tree trunk back? Why not just capture the prey? Perhaps it wanted to build a nest. Typically, birds would use dry branches to build their nests. To this bird's size, an ordinary length like a tree branch was no different from a tree branch to it. Due to water absorption, dry trees were harder to find than branches. This tree trunk, which was dried by the spiritual qi of the sword cultivator clone for comfort, naturally attracted the giant bird's attention. Jiang Li, who did not have any experience in this aspect, would not have expected that he would encounter such a thing even when sleeping in a tree. If only he could use appraisal. The clone sighed and looked away from the small hole. He took out a leather wine flask. He raised his head and gulped it down. This was how the liquor fire sword cultivators prepared for battle. This bird did not look kind at all. It was definitely a carnivore. Jiang Li did not dare to guarantee that if he appeared directly, it would be calm and let his clone leave. Chapter 108, Chasing Fleeing. In a short while, he finished about 5 kilograms of hard liquor. His face was already red, and the temperature around him was quietly rising. 3,000 meters up in the air, a golden-winged condor was flying towards its lair while holding a log. This log was extremely dry, the best material to build a nest. Moreover, based on its many years of experience, there was definitely a fat worm inside the log. When its child was born, it could directly eat the freshest food. This made the golden-winged condor very satisfied with its gains today. But gradually, it felt as if the wood in its claws began to heat up. The golden-winged condor was somewhat puzzled. It lowered its head to look at the piece of wood on its claw. In its bird life, such a thing had never happened. There was a sound coming from the wood. Wine pierces the intestines and breaks the soul. Fire surges in sword heart that dreams of a long song. Boom! The log exploded, and the roaring flames engulfed the giant bird. Amidst the flames, a flying sword was held in the sword cultivator's hand as he stabbed it at the condor. Success! The sword cultivator clone was completely confident that it could not dodge the sword at this distance. Ding! However, although the sword pierced through, the tip of the longsword seemed to have hit a piece of steel plate, receiving an extremely great resistance. Fire attribute spiritual chi surged into the flying sword crazily as if it was free. The scorching temperature quickly rose, and the incomparably hard condor feathers were melted layer by layer. The sword cultivator clone was surprised by the huge bird's terrifying defense. He held burning rainbow and stabbed forward relentlessly. Pew! Withstanding the intense screeching sounds from scratching metal, burning rainbow finally broke through the feather defense and successfully pierced into the flesh. However, that was all. Huff! The golden-winged condor flapped its wings, causing a violent wind that instantly tore apart the liquor flames. As it continued to beat its wings, the huge bird head lowered and looked at Jiang Li. A savage killing intent was revealed in its sharp eyes. He could not beat it. The parallel mind quickly came to this conclusion. Sword cultivators were known for their attacks. Even when he attacked head-on with his full strength, he could only barely break through the defense and cause a slight injury. The result was very obvious. No chance. Run! The clone made a prompt decision. He kicked the condor's stomach and used the counterforce to retrieve the flying sword. Immediately, he rode his sword and flew crazily against the direction of the wind. Another advantage of a sword cultivator was that their sword kinesis flight was extremely fast. The parallel mind also specially chose to travel against the direction of the wind. The larger the condor was, the greater the wind resistance it would suffer. Only by escaping in this direction could he have a higher chance of success. Shriek! However, a sharp cry could be heard. The clone, Tang Yan, looked back to see that the condor followed closely behind him. Its hooked beak opened wide, and it was about to devour the clone. The bird flew faster than him, even in this situation. The clone held the sword hilt with one hand and let the flying sword carry him at the speed limit. His other hand reached into his pocket and took out 2 cloth bags. He bit the rope with his mouth and pulled. The opening of the bag was released, and the items in the 2 bags were immediately and accurately thrown into the mouth of the condor. Shriek! The condor's speed immediately decreased drastically. It flapped its wings and stopped on the spot. It coughed violently before spitting out the waste pills and ashes that Jiang Li had thrown into its mouth. However, by the time it flapped its wings again, the clone had already flown more than 2,000 meters away. With a buffer of more than 2,000 meters, even if the flying sword's speed was slightly inferior to the condor, the gap was still there. Jiang Li was confident that he could persist for another day and night if it wanted to catch up to this 2,000 meters gap. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. The clone kept turning back, but the condor continued to pursue him. The distance between them was slowly shrinking, and the patience of the condor truly made Jiang Li helpless. Why was this monster so fixed on him? He was so tiny and had little meat. Why was it chasing so persistently? In the cultivation world, it seemed that burrowing into the stomach of a large-sized demon was the standard solution. Since this was not the main body, if he really could not escape later, he would give it a try. As he flew, the clone that had made up his mind suddenly saw a few faint shadows in the distant sky. Soon, as the distance increased, the few black shadows gradually became clear. It seemed that they were a group of cultivators flying in the sky. If it was under normal circumstances, Jiang Li would have rushed up and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, please wait." This was the standard way to divert trouble to others. But he did not do so. This was because, to be able to fly to this height on a magic artifact, the weakest person in that group would probably be at the Foundation establishment realm. If the other party discovered his intention and obstructed him instead, he would have to bear the consequences. The parallel mind thought for a moment. Then, he immediately turned 45 degrees and flew in another direction with the condor chasing him. However, because of this maneuver, the condor caught up to him again. "Senior brother, he didn't come over." Among the group of cultivators, a female cultivator spoke in surprise. The others who were with her were also surprised by the sword cultivator's change in direction. They had clearly noticed the commotion here long ago. However, not only did they not panic because of this, they even discussed excitedly what the sword cultivator would do. One chased while the other fled, which meant that the sword cultivator's strength was definitely inferior to the condor. Judging from his speed, it was obvious that he was also slower. On the other hand, the expenditure of spiritual qi when a cultivator rode a flying sword was obviously much greater than when the condor flapped its wings. As time passed, this sword cultivator would definitely die. Therefore, most of the cultivators thought that the other party would rush over and implicate them. This was originally a very normal thing, and it could not be said to be good or bad, but Jiang Li actually changed direction to avoid them. This was very surprising. They did not know whether to call him stupid or kind-hearted. I've long heard of the unyielding character of the Shu Mountain sword cultivators. Now that I see it, they really live up to their reputation. The man in the lead said, "Junior brother, junior sister, let's go help him." Earlier, only he thought that the sword cultivator clone would kindly avoid them. The reason was simple. He was a Shu Mountain disciple. This man was not old. He looked tall and handsome. His appearance was not inferior to that of the sword cultivator clone. Most importantly, he had an indescribable aura of a leader. If the sword cultivator clone stood together with him, no matter how handsome he would instantly lose his luster. On the left chest of his robe, there was a bold and vigorous storage word. As soon as he finished speaking, the man's figure dissipated like clouds. The few cultivators behind him also took out their weapons and artifacts and flew in the direction where the sword cultivator clone escaped. Moving the perspective back to the clone, Tang Yan. This turn was not the biggest problem. It was that the wind direction had actually changed. He went from going against the wind to going along with the wind. Jiang Li cursed in his heart, but before he could think of a solution, a shadow struck the sword cultivator clone from above. The clone looked up and saw that the condor had flown behind him at some point in time, thanks to the wind. Shrika. This time the condor had learned its lesson. It no longer used its mouth to peck him. Instead, it stretched out its sharp claws and pounced at the sword cultivator clone. If he was caught by this clone that had yet to live long would probably be torn to pieces instantly. The clone did not escape. He turned around and held his sword, swinging it wildly at the huge bird. A drunken song filled with determination. The flames of war illuminate the world. In an instant, more than 100 streaks of liquor fire spiritual qi shot out. The condor collided head-on without dodging. Huge patches of burnt bird feathers fell. Fire countered metal to begin with. Coupled with the might of the flying sword, if it was attacked too much, the condor would definitely be injured. However, if the sword cultivator clone was hit once, he might die immediately. Chapter 109, Sword Heart. At the critical moment of facing life and death, the wildly beating heart of the sword cultivator clone suddenly slowed down. From a critical state of more than 200 beats per minute, there was a sudden plummet until his heartbeat became an extremely slow rate of once per 3 seconds. However, not only did this intense change in his body not make his clone Tang Yan feel uncomfortable, his mind and body instantly calmed down. Before his eyes, two huge claws that were even larger than his entire body enveloped him. However, the speed seemed to have suddenly slowed down by 10 times as it slowly played frame by frame. At the same time, the burning rainbow in his hand shook slightly, and then a joyous emotion connected with his consciousness. The flying sword in his hand, which was already extremely obedient, became even more easily manipulated. It was a very wonderful feeling. The right limb felt like it was suddenly extended by several feet. He could even clearly feel the violent wind blowing past the blade. The clone suddenly felt extremely confident in the sword in his hand. Although there was no reason, he was very certain in his heart that the burning rainbow in his hand would definitely be unstoppable. Swoosh! With a slight tremble, Sword Light rushed forward with the flying sword in hand. Using the fire sword chi that he had created through expending his spiritual chi to block its vision, the sword cultivator shifted to dodge the sharp claws. Then, he waved the burning rainbow in his hand and slashed out. The golden metallic feathers, which were as hard as Kun steel, were slashed apart by the flying sword, followed by the skin, flesh, blood, and bones. Before the blood could flow out, it was already evaporated by the scorching hot sword. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. The sword cultivator's figure flashed past the building-sized golden-winged condor, leaving a charred wound on the giant bird. This strike caused considerable damage. Jiang Li stroked the flying sword as he gained a lot of understanding. This was the sword heart. It turned out that other than tearing paper with a rusty sword, the sword heart talent could also do such a thing. Jiang Li was extremely shocked by this. The amount of spiritual chi condensed from the sword strike earlier was actually far inferior to the spiritual chi used when his clone unleashed the first strike. But the results of these two sword attacks were so different. It was no wonder that the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak valued the sword heart so much. It was effective on a target that was one realm higher and practically ignored the effects of defense. If he used it well, coupled with the powerful attack power of a sword cultivator, fighting above one's level was simply not a dream. Shrika! The condor cried out in pain, but after flapping its wings for a while, it still stopped and did not fall to the ground. Damn it, Jiang Li cursed in his heart. The sword strike from before had originally headed for its wings, but the condor was too large. Compared to it, a flying sword that was the size of a toothpick was too tiny to truly cause fatal damage. The clone immediately activated the sword technique, wanting to take the opportunity to strike again. However, things did not go as he expected. Just as the flying sword left his hand, his vision blurred and his heart beat wildly again. He was forced out of the sword heart state. In an instant, flying sword burning rainbows might decrease drastically, no longer as sharp as before. After Jiang Li's mind recovered its clarity, the hand seals on his hand changed again and again. The flying sword no longer swooped down. After spitting out a wisp of spirit fire that reeked of alcohol, he immediately turned the sword around and flew back to catch the clone who was free falling. In order to cut off the possible connection between him and his clone, Jiang Li did not provide any artifacts to his clone. Therefore, if he wanted to use the flying sword to attack from afar, he would not be able to ride on the sword. This was also the reason why Jiang Li had been practicing close combat with his flying sword. If he continued to forcefully control the flying sword to attack, It would be a small matter if he could not break through the feather's defense. In the event the flying sword was stuck or even sent flying, he would not even have the chance to escape. Just as the clone urged the flying sword under his feet to escape again, a cloud suddenly gathered beside him. Immediately, a graceful man appeared from the cloud and stood in front of the clone. "Junior brother, if you don't mind, please let us lend you a hand." The sudden appearance of a cultivator naturally made Jiang Li instinctively wary. However, when he saw the familiar clothes of the other party, he could not help but be stunned. Wasn't this the uniform of an inner sect disciple of the Scripture Storage Valley? However, it looked like the style of the other party's disciple uniform was slightly different from Jiang Li's actual clothes, and it seemed to be even more elegant and noble. "He called me junior brother. Did he recognize me?" This was the first thought that popped up in Jiang Li's mind, but it was immediately ruled out. This clone was very perfect. It should not be so easy to expose. The other party had called him this out of the tradition of the four major sects. Thank you, senior brother." The clone stepped on the flying sword and cupped his fists in greeting. He did not think much before agreeing. After all, with the reputation of the four major sects of the Great Mountain region, very few disciples would kill each other to seize treasures because that would be too unwise. Moreover, Jiang Li vaguely felt that he should know the other party. Shrika. The liquor flames that burning rainbow had just shot out was torn apart by the golden wings once more. The enormous condor's sharp gaze stared fixedly at Jiang Li as it pounced towards him from below. A large amount of spirit flames erupted from the burning rainbow sword. However, before he could attack, a small golden seal was thrown out from the Scripture Storage Valley's senior brother. It was as if he had casually tossed a stone. However, after the golden seal left his hand, it swelled up with the wind. In just a moment, it had already risen to a height of 10 meters, and the seal smashed towards the condor below. Jiang Li was shocked in his heart, and even his main body that was 500 km away could not help but tremble. He seemed to have heard of this seal when he was listening to his fellow disciples bragging in the demon vanquishing hall. Could this be the ultimate technique of the Scripture Storage Valley? Who exactly was this guy? The golden seal that was enlarged hundreds of times collided with the condor. Then the situation became one-sided. In front of Jiang Li, the condor that had acted tyrannically was smashed by a 10-meter golden seal. It fell towards the ground while shrieking in pain. When the golden seal shrank and flew back, many unnatural distortions appeared on the condor's body. Blood spurted out of the bird's mouth. It had obviously been heavily injured. Jiang Li was shocked by the might of the golden seal, but he did not forget to deal the finishing blow. Turning around, he held the flying sword again and chased after the falling condor, quickly slashing out sword lights. At this moment, the others from the Scripture Storage Valley arrived as well. Several artifacts left their hands and smashed into the condor. After being heavily injured and facing attacks like these, no matter how tough its physique was, it could not withstand it at this time. Under the ravaging of spiritual qi, the huge bird finally exploded with a bang. It shattered into pieces and was beyond dead. Chapter 110, Amnesia. Jiang Li heaved a sigh of relief and slowly landed on the ground on his flying sword. The huge bird that had chased him for half a day was finally dead. Now he understood why the sex ships, be it warships or flying ships, had to contain so many offensive and defensive array formations. The cultivation world was really too dangerous. If one did not have enough defensive ability to counterattack, would a large flying ship in the air simply be prey for demon beasts? On the other side, the other disciples of the Scripture Storage Valley also landed. They did not pay much attention to the sword cultivator clone. Instead, they excitedly checked the scattered corpse of the condor. The corpse of such ferocious demon beasts could often be dissected into many precious materials. The feathers and beak were used for refining weapons, while the blood and powdered bone were used for refining pills. Both were quite good choices. Furthermore, as the grade of the golden-winged condor was not low, it was basically equivalent to a core formation cultivator. These materials would definitely be sold for a considerable price in the sect. It was not until another cloud gathered, and the man who was obviously the leader appeared that the other disciples stopped their casual actions and stood behind him. Senior brother and fellow disciples of the four major sects, I'm really grateful for your help today. I have yet to ask for senior brother and everyone's names. If there's a chance, I should pay you a visit in the future to thank you. Jiang Li walked over as well. He put away the flying sword in his hand and cupped his hands to thank the few people from the scripture storage valley. Junior brother, there's no need to stand on ceremony. When we're out, as disciples of the same faction, we should help each other. The disciples of our scripture storage valley are often taken care of by the seniors of other sects. How can we stand by and do nothing when this happens? My name is Xianxia. I am the direct disciple of the scripture storage valley's Taoist Wuxia. They are all my junior brothers and sisters. I should be a few years older than you, so I'll shamelessly address myself as senior brother. Please don't take offense. It's fate that we met. Junior brother, can you also leave us your name? The man in the lead spoke eloquently. Coupled with his bearing, he indeed looked like a cool spring breeze. However, the name Xianxia caused Jiang Li to recall something. Wasn't this the mysterious eldest senior brother of the scripture storage valley? Wait, I remember now. The skill-imparting elder mentioned before that the name of the scripture storage valley's valley master is Taoist Wuxia. I'll remember this. In the future, if anyone asks who the master of the scripture storage valley is, I will be able to answer. Senior brother Chu's cultivation is profound. The accomplished are the most revered in the cultivation world. This is how it should be. My name is Tang Yin. I am from. Jiang Li acted speechless as he spoke. He touched the small red sword on his chest, but he was unable to say the name of the sect no matter what. Xianxia and the others looked at each other, not understanding what Jiang Li's performance meant. With his outfit, was there a need to guess? Shouldn't he be proud to announce the name of a major sect? Why was he stammering? However, Xianxia was indeed worthy of being Xianxia. This senior brother was indeed meticulous. When he discovered that Jiang Li was unwilling to speak about the sect, he took the initiative to interrupt Jiang Li's conflict. On the other hand, shouldn't the disciples of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak all leave the mountain in groups of 5? Why is junior brother alone? Due to the strict requirements of recruiting disciples from the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, there were not many disciples. In fact, they were not even as prosperous as some small sects. Therefore, the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was famous for being protective of their disciples. For the sake of safety, if the disciples wanted to leave the mountain, their strength would be the #1 factor. The disciples of the 5 Elements Peak formed a team with the ability to use the 5 Elements sword formation proficiently. This was also the standard. Therefore, it was actually quite strange for the sword cultivator clone to appear here alone. However, upon hearing this, the clone revealed a look of confusion from the bottom of his heart, as if he really did not know anything about what Xianxia said. Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. The clone muttered to himself. It seemed that because of these few keywords, he recalled some memory fragments and appeared a little vexed. Jiang Li was not pretending. His acting skills were not that impressive. It was because, in order to better understand life, the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra had an ability that could unilaterally block the memories of the main body, allowing the consciousness to temporarily become independent. According to the memories and encounters of this body, it would act naturally. This was what he had done just now, making that amnesia expression come from the bottom of his heart. Junior brother, what's wrong? If you need our help, just let us know. Seeing the clone's expression, Xianxia also discovered that something was wrong. But even if the Shu Mountain robes could be faked, the Shu Mountain flying swords could. How could that powerful Shu Mountain sword technique be faked? The characteristics of the powerful sword heart were too obvious. If this Tang Yan was not a Shu Mountain disciple, who could have produced a sword cultivator of this level in the Great Mountain region? I'm fine. Thank you for your kindness, Senior Brother Chu. I still have some things to do, so I'll take my leave now. In his memories, the sword cultivator's clone subconsciously touched the wound on his neck. Then, as if he recalled something, he suddenly cupped his hands and bade farewell impolitely. Junior brother, wait a moment. The golden-winged condor usually lives together as a couple. With this male bird here, the nest and female bird should be nearby. Junior brother should be careful. Chu Yongxuan still wanted to ask Jiang Li to share the materials on the golden-winged condor, but Jiang Li rejected. He said that he was saved by them, so how could he share the spoils of war? Furthermore, the yin burial coffin was not here. He could not bring the best loot away and had no interest in the insignificant body parts. It would be a hindrance if he took it, so he might as well leave it. Before he left, Chu Yongxuan reminded him to fly at a lower altitude so as to reduce the chance of being discovered. After a few pleasantries, Jiang Li did not stay any longer. The flying sword, burning rainbow, automatically unsheathed itself and allowed him to step onto the sword. The flying sword rose into the air and flew away, but he listened to Chu Yongxuan's suggestion. It flew close to the forest and stayed low, not flying high in the sky like a shooting star. After the clone left, one of the disciples asked, "Senior brother, don't you find that Shu Mountain disciple odd?" "It's very strange. He's clearly a Shu Mountain disciple. I've fought with them before. The feeling of the flying sword and sword technique can't be wrong. But for him, it's as if he doesn't remember anything about the Shu Mountain. When we talk about these issues, he can't answer at all." Everyone was not stupid. Jiang Li's strange performance was naturally seen and remembered in their hearts. Even the outer sect disciples of the Scripture Storage Valley would know more about such general knowledge. However, there were not so many melodramatic dramas in this era. Apart from the brain, cultivators mostly relied on their souls to memorize things. Therefore, memory loss was extremely rare, so they naturally did not think of it immediately. Should we not let him leave? A disciple suddenly came up with a dumb idea. He had long heard that Shu Mountain disciples were stronger. Now that he had met one, he wanted to give it a try. The others immediately rolled their eyes when they heard this. This method was obviously unreliable. That Tang Yan can't even remember the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, so how can he still remember our Scripture Storage Valley? If there's a misunderstanding, it won't be good if we get hurt or injure him. The female cultivator calmly analyzed. Junior sister is right. After all, this is the Shu Mountain's internal affairs. It's not good to get involved. The mystic realm we are going to this time has people from Shu Mountain present. At that time, we can just tell them about it. Chu Yongxuan's words were final. After the group of people plundered and dissected the condor's body, they all put it into Chu Yongxuan's storage artifact. Although a storage artifact was rare, as the eldest senior brother of the sect, he was still qualified to possess it. After taking off again, they headed in the opposite direction of the clone. The memory loss was naturally Jiang Li's intention. He wanted them to help spread it to the ears of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. After all, Jiang Li did not put his consciousness into this body, but he did not want to make him become a rogue cultivator. After returning to the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, wouldn't it be good for him to obtain the ancient legacy and cultivation methods of Shu Mountain? It was not impossible for Jiang Li to return to the mountain on his own. However, if he returned to the sect, he might be suspected by Shu Mountain and run into a lot of trouble. It was better to send out the news and get them to send someone to pick him up. People would always have more trust in what they took the initiative to find. Although a sudden resurrection would still arouse suspicion and probing, at that time, Tang Yan had only fallen into the water after being attacked by the Golden Core zombie demon. His death was not confirmed. It was not so hard to accept that he had survived after being washed downstream.